Welcome to the space if you're new here, and welcome back if you're returning. This is episode 2 of our self care chat support podcast, where back in episode 1, I kicked things off with a sneak peek into my upcoming book called To Be Honest Confessions of a Heal-A-Holic, and its entries of personal revelations and collective nuggets of wisdom from my personal self care diary. And this next entry is called Mother's Day. Let's begin. To be honest, the best thing I could have done to help heal my mother wounds and elevate the narrative, not only from my own childhood but as a single mom, was seeing my mom as a human. It was hard at first, but it wasn't until then that so much of who I am and why I am started to make sense. As a kid, I always thought my mom did what she did for a reason, and there just had to be. I refused to believe otherwise. And I just kept that in my mind, even in the days that I started to resent her, which we'll get into later. Now, that didn't stop me from feeling things like abandonment and left out, unheard, etc. I understood from a very young age that you can love but not like someone. I spent part of my childhood growing up without my mom and my dad, and then for a period I did live with my mom, and then that's when things changed in the way I felt about her. Up until that point, I pretty much hadn't decided if I loved her, I liked her, or what I really felt about her, because I really didn't know her. For the time that I wasn't living with her, I never thought about life with her. And then when the opportunity presented itself to me to move with her, part of me became like overwhelmingly drawn to the idea of leaving the life I had known growing up to start a new chapter. And I didn't really understand where or why this feeling came over me, but I just knew it. So it wasn't until moving with her that I learned what it meant to actually resent someone. I thought this move would be my chance to finally get close to her, but I felt more distant than ever. And to be honest, I've never shared this much of my motherhood wound with anyone. So, you guys, you're hearing this exclusively first time. I would like you to imagine living with a stranger who suddenly became in charge of taking care of you. That's what it felt like. So in my mind, back then I thought, why did she even want me? If she was just going to keep ignoring me. That's how I rationalized it as a kid. And there were times that I genuinely hated living in that space. There were times I didn't feel protected in that space. There were times that I felt afraid, many times, to speak up in that space. But yet it perplexed me how I was expected to still be a well-mannered child despite all of the emptiness that I felt and the things that I was going through. And I had no idea how to express it without the fear of being judged, misunderstood, or having to stay in a child's place. So I felt I might as well have stayed where I was, right? And that feeling grew over the years and was influenced by some other parts of my youth that didn't feel so great. But I said all that to say, though that was a tough part of my childhood to have to heal through, it brought me to this beautiful place of liberation that I feel now. I'm able to use that time as not only a way to see how far I've come, but I no longer associate with the narrative of victimhood because I see it for what it was. Was it painful? Yes, absolutely. Did it leave residue? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. It did. And no matter how anyone may perceive my experience, your experience, nobody knows what you may be struggling with. Nobody knows what you may be crying about at night or what may be weighing heavily on your heart. And once I became a mom, I realized how much of what we need isn't considered, not because people don't feel we deserve it, not because we don't bend over backwards for those we love. I realized that much of what we want and need also goes uncommunicated, and boundaries become uncomfortable to set, especially when it comes to your self-care. And God only knows, having to set those kinds of boundaries with your children is a whole other situation. And I also realized how dehumanizing it can feel to uphold such a responsibility like motherhood, especially when it comes to society's norms on what that experience should look like. And all of that on top of your own childhood trauma that up until motherhood, maybe you had coping mechanisms that were locked and loaded, only to find yourself repeating many of the same patterns and cycles you swore that you wouldn't. Now, this may not be the truth for all, but it is the raw truth for many. And regardless of how my and my mother's relationship goes from here and how she chooses to be who she is from here on out, I see her with less judgment and more understanding. It doesn't gloss over my experience by any means, and I think that she knows that I wasn't happy. But she did what she felt like she needed to do, and sometimes living your truth comes at the expense of others being affected in all kinds of ways. Even when you think that you are making the very best possible choice, sometimes there's always somebody that's going to be unsatisfied. And honestly, so much of our choices are not even for our experience as much as they are for others. We can hold grudges, we can do whatever, but the fact is that your choices aren't just about you, whether you're a parent or not, because you never know how they will impact others. And while I'm not saying that for you to think you should be basing your choices on making other people comfortable, I'm saying it to say when your inner world is well tended, your outer world, you can tend to that with much more ease, and your actions will be much more in alignment and much more inspired. And whatever you do in that outer world is less likely to leave detrimental impact. So I can now use this as a tool in my own parenting experience and be okay with being human in front of my child, while also explaining as best as I can what these human moments are. This is giving the opportunity to teach so much, but most importantly, it's cultivating a new narrative in our lineage. And at the same time, it's opening space for bonding. And that's what motherhood has done for me. We may not be able to choose the environment that we are born into, but we can absolutely choose what we do with it. So when I say I see you, I hear you, it should definitely hit different. And I'm sharing this for your and my wellness, so that it keeps our connection clean, okay? I've learned that it may be the trauma that bonds us, but it doesn't have to bind us. And I want to deep dive into that just a little sprinkle. To bond is to be liberated. Bond has so many definitions, okay? And it's all about your perspective. I choose to see bond as a chance to be liberated. Bonding is where breakthrough happens. Binding, however, is very linear. It only moves one way. So I want you to go and look up the definitions and consider what I've just said here. That bonding is where breakthrough happens, because bonding has so many definitions. And it's all in your perspective. Now, binding also has many different definitions. But when you're talking about trauma, You want to be careful what words you apply where. So we can bond for breakthrough based on our trauma, our shared experiences, if that feels a little better for somebody out there. But we don't have to be binded because of these traumas. I think that's where the misconception comes in about trauma bonding, is that it has this very highly negative connotation. And honestly, these stories that we share, these traumas that we've experienced, these are literal breakthroughs for not only ourselves but other people. And it's what we do with it from there that determines whether now we are binded by this trauma and now your trauma has become my trauma. That's an energetic exchange, by the way. Or we can just grow from these traumas, and maybe we may not grow down the same path, but now you may have given me a piece to my puzzle that I was missing, that I needed to continue forward. So just consider that, I hope you can join me in effort to, use our words with a little more awareness as we progress. If you found resonance with this session, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, follow, wherever you're listening to this from. Do the things, okay? You can even drop me an emoji in the comments if you have any topics related to self-care that you would like me to discuss, or you would like to hear discussed on the podcast. Definitely let me know, okay? This has been Be Well Babe with Coach Isha, and I'm wishing you peace as you pace. Ashe.